24. The spiraling cadaver. The university is in ruins, non-functional in the social arenas of the market and employment, lacking cultural substance or an end purpose of knowledge. 144. Strictly speaking, there is no longer even any power, it is also in ruins. Whence the impossibility of the return of the fires of 1968, of the return of putting in question knowledge versus power itself, the explosive contradiction of knowledge and power, or the revelation of their collusion, which comes to the same thing, in the university, and, at the same time, through symbolic, rather than political, contagion in the whole institutional and social order. Why sociologists? Mark this shift, the impasse of knowledge, the vertigo of non-knowledge, that is to say at once the absurdity and the impossibility of accumulating value in the order of knowledge, turns like an absolute weapon against power itself, in order to dismantle it according to the same vertiginous scenario of dispossession. This is the May 1968 effect. Today it cannot be achieved since power itself, after knowledge, has taken off, has become ungraspable, has dispossessed itself. In a now uncertain institution, without knowledge content, without a power structure, except for an archaic feudalism that turns a simulacrum of a machine whose destiny escapes it and whose survival is as artificial as that of barracks and theaters, offensive eruption is impossible. Only what precipitates rotting, by accentuating the parodic, simulacral side of dying games of knowledge and power, has meaning. A strike has exactly the opposite effect. It regenerates the ideal of a possible university, the fiction of an ascension on everyone's part to a culture that is unlocatable, and that no longer has meaning. This ideal is substituted for the operation of the university as its critical alternative, as its therapy. This fiction still dreams of a permanency and democracy of knowledge. Besides, everywhere today the left plays this role. It is the justice of the left that reinjects an idea of justice, the necessity of logic and social morals into a rotten apparatus that is coming undone, which is losing all conscience of its legitimacy and renounces functioning almost of its own volition. It is the left that secretes and desperately reproduces power, because it wants power, and therefore the left believes in it and revives it precisely where the system puts an end to it. The system puts an end one by one to all its axioms, to all its institutions, and realizes one by one all the objectives of the historical and revolutionary left that sees itself constrained to revive the wheels of capital in order to lay siege to them one day, from private property to the small business, from the army to national grandeur, from Puritan morality to petit bourgeois culture, justice at the university, everything that is disappearing, that the system itself, in its atrocity, certainly, but also in its irreversible impulse, has liquidated, must be conserved. Whence the paradoxical but necessary inversion of all the terms of political analysis. Power, or what takes its place, no longer believes in the university. It knows fundamentally that it is only a zone for the shelter and surveillance of a whole class of a certain age, it therefore has only to select, it will find its elite elsewhere, or by other means. Diplomas are worthless, why would it refuse to award them? In any case it is ready to award them to everybody. Why this provocative politics, if not in order to crystallize energies on a fictive stake, selection, work, diplomas, etc., on an already dead and rotting referential? By rotting, the university can still do a lot of damage. Rotting is a symbolic mechanism, not political but symbolic, therefore subversive for us. But for this to be the case it is necessary to start with this very rotting, and not to dream of resurrection. It is necessary to transform this rotting into a violent process, into violent death, through mockery and defiance, through a multiplied simulation that would offer the ritual of the death of the university as a model of decomposition to the whole of society, a contagious model of the disaffection of a whole social structure, where death would finally make its ravages, which the strike tries desperately to avert, in complicity with the system, but succeeds, on top of it all, only in transforming the university into a slow death, a delay that is not even the possible side of a subversion, of an offensive reversion. That is what the events of May 1968 produced. At a less advanced point in the process of the liquefaction of the university and of culture, the students, far from wishing to save the furniture, revive the lost object, in an ideal mode, retorted by confronting power with the challenge of the total, immediate death of the institution, the challenge of a deterritorialization even more intense than the one that came from the system, and by summoning power to respond to this total derailment of the institution of knowledge, to this total lack of a need to gather in a given place, this death desired in the end, not the crisis of the university, that is not a challenge, on the contrary, it is the game of the system, but the death of the university, to that challenge, power has not been able to respond, except by its own dissolution in return, only for a moment maybe, but we saw it. The barricades of May 10th seemed defensive and to be defending a territory, the Latin Quarter, old boutique. But this is not true. Behind this facade, it was the dead university, the dead culture whose challenge they were launching at power, and their own eventual death at the same time, a transformation into immediate sacrifice, which was only the long-term operation of the system itself, the liquidation of culture and of knowledge. They were not there to save the Sorbonne, but to brandish its cadaver in the face of the others, just as black people in Watts and in Detroit brandished the ruins of their neighborhoods to which they had themselves set fire. What can one brandish today? No longer even the ruins of knowledge, of culture, the ruins themselves are defunct. We know it, we have mourned Nanterre for 7 years. 1968 is dead, repeatable only as a phantasm of mourning. What would be the equivalent in symbolic violence, that is to say beyond the political, would be the same operation that caused non-knowledge, the rotting of knowledge to come up against power, no longer discovering this fabulous energy on the same level at all, but on the superior spiral, causing non-power, the rotting of power to come up against what precisely? There lies the problem. It is perhaps insoluble. Power is being lost, power has been lost. All around us there are nothing but dummies of power, but the mechanical illusion of power still rules the social order, behind which grows the absent, illegible, terror of control, the terror of a definitive code, of which we are the minuscule terminals. Attacking representation no longer has much meaning either. One senses quite clearly, for the same reason, that all student conflicts, as is the case, more broadly, on the level of global society, around the representation, the delegation of power are no longer anything but phantom vicissitudes that yet still manage, out of despair, to occupy the forefront of the stage. Through I don't know what Mobius effect, representation itself has also turned in on itself, and the whole logical universe of the political is dissolved at the same time, ceding its place to a transfinite universe of simulation, where from the beginning no one is represented nor representative of anything anymore, where all that is accumulated is decumulated at the same time, where even the axiological, directive, and salvageable phantasm of power has disappeared. A universe that is still incomprehensible, unrecognizable, to us, a universe with a malefic curve that our mental coordinates, which are orthogonal and prepared for the infinite linearity of criticism and history, violently resist. Yet it is there that one must fight, if even fighting has any meaning anymore. We are simulators, we are simulacra, not in the classical sense of appearance, we are concave mirrors radiated by the social, a radiation without a light source, power without origin, without distance, and it is in this tactical universe of the simulacrum that one will need to fight, without hope. Hope is a weak value, but in defiance and fascination. Because one must not refuse the intense fascination that emanates from this liquefaction of all power, of all axes of value, of all axiology, politics included. This spectacle, which is at once that of the death throes and the apogee of capital, surpasses by far that of the commodity described by the situationists. This spectacle is our essential force. We are no longer in a relation toward capital of uncertain or victorious forces, but in a political one, that is the phantasm of revolution. We are in a relation of defiance, of seduction, and of death toward this universe that is no longer one, precisely because all axiality that escapes it. The challenge capital directs at us in its delirium, liquidating without shame the law of profit, surplus value, productive finalities, structures of power, and finding at the end of its process the profound immorality, but also the seduction, of primitive rituals of destruction. This very challenge must be raised to an insanely higher level. Capital, like value, is irresponsible, irreversible, ineluctable. Only to value is capital capable of offering a fantastic spectacle of its decomposition. Only the phantom of value still floats over the desert of the classical structures of capital, just as the phantom of religion floats over a world now long desacralized, just as the phantom of knowledge floats over the university. It is up to us to again become the nomads of this desert, but disengaged from the mechanical illusion of value. We will live in this world, which for us has all the disquieting strangeness of the desert and of the simulacrum, with all the veracity of living phantoms, of wandering and simulating animals that the death of capital has made of us, because the desert of cities is equal to the desert of sand, the jungle of signs is equal to that of the forests, the vertigo of simulacra is equal to that of nature, only the vertiginous seduction of a dying system remains, in which work buries work, in which value buries value, leaving a virgin, sacred space without pathways, continuous as Baudrillard wished it, where only the wind lifts the sand, where only the wind washes over the sand. What can one make of all this in the political order? Very little. But we also have to fight against the profound fascination exerted on us by the death throes of capital, against the staging by capital of its own death, when we are really the ones in our final hours. To leave it the initiative of its own death, is to leave it all the privileges of revolution. Surrounded by the simulacrum of value and by the phantom of capital and of power, we are much more disarmed and impotent than when surrounded by the law of value and of the commodity, since the system has revealed itself capable of integrating its own death and since we are relieved of the responsibility for this death, and thus of the stake of our own life. This supreme ruse of the system, that of the simulacrum of its death, through which it maintains us in life by having liquidated through absorption all possible negativity, only a superior ruse can stop. Challenge or imaginary science, only a pataphysics of simulacra can remove us from the system's strategy of simulation and the impasse of death in which it imprisons us.